So welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you can join us this evening. This evening's presentation is Water Quality of the West River. And my name is Margot Gia. I'm going to be the host and moderator for this evening. I work for Windham Regional Commission as the Natural Resources Planner. And Windham Regional Commission is one of many water quality partners that works throughout Southeastern Vermont. We have the leadership of Marie Caduto, who happens to be here on this evening's presentation. And Marie works for the Vermont DEC, and she is the watershed planner for all of Southeastern Vermont. And then we have other water quality partners, including Windham Regional Commission, where I work. We have Corey Ross on this evening, who is with the Conservation District, the Windham County Conservation District. Ryan O'Donnell, who I'll introduce in just a minute. He has worked for the Southeastern Vermont Watershed Alliance and the Deerfield River Watershed Alliance, as well as Connecticut River Conservancy. And you'll hear a little bit about those organizations. And so all of these organizations work very closely together, and we work on monitoring and working on restoration projects that help protect water quality in the waters of Southeastern Vermont. And so you can contact any of the partners if you have concerns or interest in some sort of restoration project, and we can also help you get connected to the right partner that might be able to best suit you, the type of project or interest that you have. So I am going to be monitoring the chat during the presentation. If you have a general question, we'll probably hold those until the end of the presentation. Although if you have a burning question that is a clarifying question, feel free to either put it in the chat and I will be monitoring that, or you can jump right in and just ask before Ryan clicks to the next screen. But most of the question and answers will be happening at the end of the presentation portion. So if you don't hesitate to wait if you have a question and you type it into the chat so you don't forget it. It's always a good way, and we'll make sure we get to it. So without further ado, I want to welcome Ryan O'Donnell. Ryan has worked as the water quality coordinator for the Southeastern Vermont Watershed Alliance. He has also then grown the position. He started working then with Deerfield River Watershed Alliance.
Association.
All those A words that come at the end. And now works with the Connecticut River Conservancy as sort of the overseer and director of water quality monitoring for larger swaths than just Southeastern Vermont. And I will, without further ado, I'm going to let Ryan take over, but we're excited to have you here talking about the West River tonight.
Great. Thank you. The West River has a very long history of water quality monitoring. I think SEWA was originally the West River Watershed Association Alliance, something or other, and I believe Beek might have done some monitoring. And so there's a long history of water quality monitoring on the West River. But I feel like when I'm reviewing things, it often gets overlooked because, spoiler alert, it's pretty clean. So, sometimes that sounds boring, but it's nice to kind of do a presentation where I get to say, so far, pretty good. Yeah, so I took a look at the past 5 years. I didn't go all the way back to the 90s, but really the past 5 years of monitoring, which is kind of a transitional period of monitoring, as I'll get into. So I've learned you got to start with the basics and just make sure that we're all on the same page of what we mean when we're talking about a watershed. A watershed is an area of land that drains to a particular water body, and there can be sub-watersheds. So this dotted yellow line is the watershed. And then you can see there's a smaller subsection that is the sub watershed. That's a tributary, which does come into play in the West River, as we do monitor a few of the tributaries, which are smaller rivers and streams feeding into a larger. And then of course, the West River watershed is a tributary of the Connecticut River watershed. And the important thing to think about when thinking about a watershed is that, you know, everything that's happening on the land, this city, this farm, is affecting the water and the water quality. So I already answered this question, what affects water quality? These two graphs kind of cover the basics. Don't worry about reading the ones on this on the right. So first we have kind of how, you know, the water, if it's raining, it lands on the ground and then either it gets soaked up into the ground, evaporates, picked up by a plant through transpiration, or it runs off into the nearest water body. And on the left, you can see different land uses. So, and then how much water, what the water does after it rains. So blue is evapotranspiration. It's very difficult to tease out how much is evaporated versus how much is taken up by plants. So those are combined into a single block called evapotranspiration. Yellow is kind of shallow groundwater, and then brown is deeper groundwater. And then you move to a pasture where there's a little bit of change, where we've switched mostly to grasses. And you're starting to see this red line creep in, which is surface runoff. That means that the water is not making any stops before heading straight to the nearest body of water. Then you get into the suburbs, maybe not something we have in the West River too much, too many suburbs, but you know, you're starting to, you have lawns, so you still have a lot of green space, but you also have a lot of pavement. And you're starting to see a lot more surface runoff, and the groundwater movement is more shallow. And then you get to the city where you have almost no green space, and it's almost all pavement, impervious. And you get, you know, basically 85% is runoff. So the water, when it lands on the pavement, it just goes straight into the nearest river. And we do see that a lot with how much Brattleboro floods. So the other figure here is a stream response, and don't worry about all the words, but the important thing is this black line is when it rains, and the red line is what a stream level would normally do. And then a blue line is what happens with more urbanization, so more of that impervious surface. And what you see is that you get a higher peak and a faster peak. And once again, we see that a lot more with the smaller local water body of the Whetstone Brook in Brattleboro, where we see these high peaks flash through the city. The West River flow is also complicated by the fact that there's several dams, including a flood control dam. So actually, you know, we can for sure say that it's the Whetstone Brook flooding Brattleboro, because there's a dam that they only close to hold back floodwaters to keep this peak from being so high further downstream. But that does affect some of my calculations, which you'll see later. So here we have the West River watershed. I've put it over just kind of like the generic Google map, since that's something you might be used to looking at. It's a pretty big watershed. You know, it enters the Connecticut River in Brattleboro. It goes up along Route 30 for a bit, and then kind of through the middle, and then it joins up with Route 100. And it encompasses a number of towns along the way. So here's a look at all of the monitoring locations. So on the left, I have a map, the same map. This time I put the satellite imagery so that you can see we got a lot of trees, which is good. And you can see, you know, like Stratton Mountains over here by Pikes Falls. So these are the sites that we've monitored over the past 5 years. And on the right, you can see what years they were monitored. We do move, we add sites, we take them away. The West River's been pretty consistent, like I said. We focused on either areas that are of interest because they're recreational interests, so swimming areas like the Dummerston Covered Bridge, and then we might add or remove sites around potential areas of pollution. So the ones that have check marks, they were monitored for all parameters discussed in this presentation, which I'll explain a little bit about each as we get to them, but E. coli, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And then the stars are ones that were monitored only for E. coli. And you'll notice in 2020, we only monitored for E. coli, and that was due to COVID affecting our monitoring programs. And then this past year, we had only 3 sites that participated in the program monitoring for nutrients. But we continued monitoring E. coli at those areas of recreational interest. So look at the stream flow over the past 5 years. This is set on a linear scale, so each thing is an equal, on the y-axis is equidistant, so 100 is the same all the way up. And you can look at this and see kind of the high peaks. Once again, there's a flood control dam. So if there wasn't, maybe these peaks would have been a little bit higher and you wouldn't have had maybe some of these cycles. I didn't go and compare it to another one, so I can't tell you which peaks are flood control releases or whatever. But this makes it really hard to tell. This scale makes it really hard to tell the difference between the low flows. So, I should explain. So we break down the flows into 3 categories of low, moderate, and high. And you can see the low is the darker dotted line and the high is the lighter dashed line. And so the lowest 25% of all flows ever measured are considered low. And then the highest 25% of flows ever measured are considered high. And then the middle 50% is moderate. And that's something that our volunteers note on their field sheets. And then we also confirm with the USGS gauge that gave us these measurements. So we put it on a logarithmic scale where 10 to 100 and 100 to 1,000 are broken up differently. We can see kind of the intricacies of the lows and the moderate flows. And you can see that we had some really low lows. One thing that strikes me about just looking at these flow maps is that we've had some really dry years and we have some really wet years, and we've had some years that were half really dry and half really wet, which if you've been gardening, you've probably noticed as well. And then you can see that they're all very different. There's different flows at different times every year, which makes it very difficult to just compare results just straight year to year. So that's one of the challenges of communicating these results to everybody. It's very easy to go, well, last year was this number, but last year maybe you were having all high flows and this year we're in low flows. So I hope to explain a little bit of the differences as we go around. So starting with E. coli bacteria. E. coli bacteria is used to determine the level of risk for recreation. So that's swimming, boating, fishing, wading, whatever. And there are 2 standards. The first is for primary contact, which is you coming into full contact with the water, usually broken down shorthand for swimming, but anything where you're making full contact with the water would be considered this. And that's set at 235 organisms per 100 milliliter. There's also a standard for secondary contact, which is something where you're not in the water, but you might be sprayed with the water. And our usual shorthand for that is boating. And that's set at 625. E. coli is an indicator organism, which means that it's often not the E. coli itself that would make you sick when you come into contact with it, but its presence in large numbers indicates that the water has been contaminated with human or animal waste. and that other harmful organisms that could make you sick are more likely to be present in the water. Some sources for E. coli include agricultural and urban runoff, failing septic systems, leaking sewer pipes, pet waste, wildlife waste, human waste. If someone leaves a pile of dirty diapers by the river, which sounds gross, but is something that definitely happens, that could be a source as well. And something that is important to note is that we usually see increased bacteria levels after rainfall. So I'm going to present each parameter in a couple of ways, each of which is imperfect, because these data are occurring in, a variety of dimensions, and we don't have like a 5-dimensional map way to show it to you. So here we have it broken down by year and then wet and dry weather. And the way that these graphs work is that the river mile is across the bottom. 0 is the mouth of the West River where it meets the Connecticut River. So Brattleboro is on the right-hand side, going upstream to the left. And then I have the swimming standard that I mentioned before as a dotted line. And you can see the West River, pretty consistent, both upstream to downstream until we get right to the end. But in dry weather, just consistent overall year to year. And then in the wet weather, we see a lot more variety of results. And a lot of that has to do with how wet was that wet weather. And that is not captured very well. But you do see that in general, in most years, it tends to be below that swimming standard along the West River. And then here's the tributaries. They're not on a line, they're just bars because they're not connected to each other. But we have sites on Utley Brook, historically on Flood Brook, North Branch Ball Mountain Brook, which is Pikes Falls. We just started the Wardsboro Brook and the Rock River, and these are all tributaries, and they're listed kind of north to south here. And you can see, once again, pretty good numbers. 2018, we saw in the previous map, the wet weather tended to be pretty high, so we can assume that was pretty wet weather that was captured on Flood Brook. But overall, once again, really good. Love to see those really tiny bars. Here I have the results broken down by flow level that I mentioned before, where we have low, moderate, and high. We have very few high flows on the West River, once again, because of the flood control dam. I think also just because it's a larger watershed and it's not as flashy as some of the other ones. Like I said, the volunteers note this on their field sheet, and then I confirm this by the USGS gauges. And something to note with bacteria is that it's more affected by whether or not it has recently rained than the flow level. So the moderate has both very low numbers and very high numbers at all sites, because moderate could be raining, it could be not. And despite the fact that we've seen high numbers at all of the sites at one time or another, they still look pretty good. All the averages are below for the most part, except for we have had an area of concern right here at Rose Road, where that's where we have our dots kind of going over this line. And we actually had to move the site in 2019 because the access became unsafe. And fortunately/unfortunately, we started in the downstream site includes another tributary that I'll mention a few times that I don't have in front of me. So now I've forgotten what it's called, but it does affect some of our results. So I think that it diluted our source of E. coli that we were investigating, but we see some effects in the nutrient results that I'll discuss later. But overall, even this as a problem area, just barely over the line, is doing a lot better than many other sites in Southeastern Vermont for E. coli. Here we look at the tributaries, and once again, very, very low numbers. Good job, West River tributaries. Next, total nitrogen. So nitrogen is a nutrient that affects plant growth. And it is the controlling nutrient in saltwater ecosystems. And you might say, well, the West River is freshwater, so what do I care about it? Well, the West River flows into the Connecticut, which flows into the Long Island Sound, which is saltwater. And Long Island Sound has too much nitrogen in it. So the Connecticut River contributes 70% of the fresh water to Long Island Sound. So any nitrogen we're sending down there is contributing to that issue. So we want to monitor it, make sure that we're not sending too much nitrogen downstream. So total nitrogen means that it counts all forms of nitrogen, including nitrates, ammonia, all of them. And sources for nitrogen include agricultural runoff, wastewater, failing septic. So nitrogen is very mobile. It dissolves very well in water. And so its numbers are less affected by rain. And here you can see a little cartoon of our nitrogen cycle. All right. So like I said, nitrogen is less affected by rain, and actually we often see it get diluted by rain. Something that's interesting looking at these results is it looks like in 2019, the rain brought some nitrogen at this one site. That was the West River Park site. So interesting, something to keep an eye on, make sure that doesn't happen again. Because the West River has such great water quality, like I mentioned, we're really down to 2 main stem sites. So 2021, you can see we only have 2 sites for this purple line. So we're not going to have this level of detail, but I'm not that concerned about it because, these are pretty low numbers once again. The suggested level here is not the Vermont standard, but is instead a level suggested by the EPA for our ecoregion, which is much lower than the Vermont standard. All right, so Utley Brook is only monitored for bacteria, so it's not on these graphs, just so you're like, where did it go? It's not here. But once again, great numbers. I don't have much to say. Pretty consistent numbers too. There's not a huge difference between the dry weather and the wet weather. So if we look at the flow levels, we have a couple interesting things, which is that the only 2 sites that have been monitored in the spring, because in this year, in addition to reducing the number of sites, we had to increase the frequency of our monitoring. And we, in 2021, and we had to start monitoring earlier and specifically target high flows. So the 2 sites that have these targeted and spring high flows are the ones that actually have higher red bars, whereas these other ones, the high flows that we happen to catch, we see diluted nitrogen. But these high flows, we see an increase in nitrogen. So this will be something that will be very interesting for me to watch moving forward, to see if that's a trend that where we see a lot of nitrogen moving in the springtime with those high flows. So we have the West River Park, but then once again, we have this area of concern where the nitrogen downstream of Thompsonburg Brook is what it's called. These sites are very close to each other. They're just, one tributary in between them. The nitrogen is a little bit higher and significantly higher in high flows, which seems like Thompsonburg Brook might be contributing a source of nitrogen. So moving forward, we might include that in our monitoring. And Maria, I've already set myself a reminder for next winter to nominate it to start investigating. And then here we go at the tributaries, and Wardsboro Brook's only been monitored this spring. it's the only one that's monitored in the spring. So we see a little bit higher red flows. But once again, we're below that line. So it's looking great to me. The other nutrient we monitor for is phosphorus. And this is another nutrient that can affect plant growth. And it's the controlling nutrient in freshwater systems. So increases in phosphorus would contribute to algal blooms could more locally. You hear a lot about phosphorus in Vermont because of Lake Champlain and needing to cut down on the phosphorus to Lake Champlain to reduce algal blooms, but also, especially in Massachusetts, anywhere there's like a slow, warm spot, which there is kind of at the end of the West River by the retreat farms, that is an opportunity for an algal bloom. And we're seeing that in Massachusetts a lot. And I know in a few spots in Vermont as well. So reducing phosphorus would be one way to help keep that from happening. Once again, the total phosphorus means that we count all forms of phosphorus. So that includes organic and inorganic, dissolved and suspended. Once again, the sources include agricultural runoff, wastewater, and failing septic. And an interesting thing about phosphorus is that it's very sticky. My volunteers, a couple of whom are here, know that we have to collect it in a glass bottle because it'll just stick to a plastic bottle. And you're not allowed to rinse the glass bottle before you collect the sample because you might collect extra phosphorus because it just latches onto the glass. But what that means is that it's sticking to all the stuff in the river as well. And so it's transported a lot by sediment. And so we do see that the levels are affected by rain, unlike nitrogen. So here we are looking at the dry and wet weather. Because the West River is kind of high quality, these graphs aren't that different. Some of the rivers in our region, these are way higher, the wet weather. But we're doing okay. A reminder that 2021, this purple line, is the only year that we've included these spring flows. So we're seeing kind of higher highs, which we expect to see. And then we also see that 2019 nutrient spike at this site. So yeah, check my notes, make sure. And we did see a one high number in 2019 for phosphorus. That kind of skewed the graph. Looking at the tributaries, once again, looking pretty good. We do see kind of a highish number on the Rock River. And I do know that the Rock River has some erosion issues left over from Irene. And we're seeing that even on our highest quality rivers, if there's some sort of landslide that is still active, that was activated in Irene and is still active, we see these phosphorus numbers coming in a little high during wet weather. And there's nothing that we can really do about that. It's just that phosphorus is bound up in that sediment. And so if we look at the flow levels, we have that same reminder that we have more high numbers for these two sites than any other of the sites. And we got some really high numbers, especially more towards the West River Park. These lower sites too can be pretty stagnant. The river gets kind of backed up from the dam on the Connecticut. So sometimes when we're sampling, the river's not moving that much, which also might affect this area. But yeah, once again, we can see that in general, there just seems to be more phosphorus at that downstream site than that upstream site, spring monitoring aside. So once again, in looking to the future, including Thompson-Burke Brook in our monitoring, we can see if that actually is true or if it's just like some weird coincidence, which has happened before. And the tributaries, and they're looking great. Once again, like I said, the Rock River has a little bit of high phosphorus when it rains. And this dotted line is the Vermont standard. I forgot to change it from suggested level. We do also test for conductivity, but we didn't test last year, and this year's numbers are still being entered. It's a long story, but so I didn't get through the conductivity, but in general, the West River has very low conductivity as well, which is just kind of like how much stuff is dissolved in the water. So you may have seen me talk about conductivity before. I'll probably talk about it again in the future, but not this year. So here are my conclusions based on this analysis. The West River has a tendency for low bacteria levels in dry weather and even after wet weather. And even lower levels in the tributaries, just consistently pretty low bacteria levels, which makes it great for all the swimming and paddling that's happening on the river. There's acceptable nutrient levels, and then there might be some concerns at West River Park. We need more investigation into Thompson-Burke Brook and whether there's a nutrient source somewhere along in that sub watershed. But overall, the West River is in pretty good condition, but every river could benefit from more trees and less runoff. So I'm going to open it up for questions. But in addition to me answering your questions, I have a couple of my own questions, which is, like Margot said, I cover large swaths of the region of New England at this point. So I really depend on the local communities to help guide my future monitoring. So what are concerns that you might have about West River water quality that might need some investigation or that you have questions about? But then also, are there any like potential sources of nutrients or bacteria that I should know about? And then I'm happy to answer any questions as well. So thank you.
Wow, that was a great presentation, Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just two questions or thoughts or observations. Thompson-Burke Brook, doesn't that drain Magic Mountain?
Yes.
Potential source, I guess. Other question related to the West River Park. I don't know how much monitoring there was in that locale before it became the West River Park, but it seemed possible that the manicured ball fields and stuff might be contributing.
It was monitored. It's a long-term site. I only recently changed the site name to West River Park because it was still called Behind the Brattleboro Professional Center. And everyone was like, what are you talking about? So yeah, we do have long-term data. I guess that would be something to look into.
So Ryan, we have a question in the chat, and the question is from Mary Ellen. And she says, you refer only to one flood control dam on the west. Aren't there two, Townsend and Ball Mountain Dam?
Are they both flood control? I don't know. Are they both flood control?
Yes, they are. Absolutely.
See, I didn't know that.
Yay. All right.
I just assumed one was doing something else.
Nope. They're both Corps of Engineers flood control.
Yeah. New England is the only area of the country that has single purpose flood control dams. Everywhere else, they made them do more than one thing. So New England has these weird empty dams that fill up, which makes, whatever.
Ryan,
Yes.
this is Gloria Cristelli, and I'm wondering what you saw or the relationship of those major storms that we had late June, July that, tore our roads in Newfane. I mean, 6 feet down on the sides. Do you think that that contributed a fair amount to the sediment and the phosphorus?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That first storm at the beginning of July. So we were told we needed to target 2 high flow events. And I don't know if you remember, but before those storms, it was pretty droughty. And
Yeah.
and we were like, are we ever going to get any high flows? And so that first storm came through, and the volunteers mobilized. They sampled on an extra day. There's crazy water, and then it just like kept raining. But I definitely do think that the high phosphorus numbers in particular definitely could have been influenced by those really heavy storms.
And then another question that goes along, Newfane just purchased or is in the process of purchasing a gravel pit. And I think Deb, you're on because of this same concern that as I was listening in the hearing, what happens to all of this gravel? Well, I see it on my road, which happens to be a steep hill, and it all gets piled up, and then it goes down and it goes into, we have Smith Brook that then goes down to the West River that goes. So is there anything that's ever done or could be done or encouraged in these towns to, how can we recover some of this? When they plow after they've sanded, all of that goes and it then goes down in, and they casually said, oh yeah, it runs in down as sediment into the rivers. And I think that's a little bit too casual. Is there anything we could do to help stop that?
I'm sure someone else can elaborate, but I know like Vermont's Better Back Roads program and stuff will help with that. But I will defer to Marie, who knows all about these sorts of things.
Basically, that's why you're seeing so many gravel rock line ditches going in all over the place. The new basically regulations that have been put into place called the MRGP, the Municipal Roads General Permit, the new requirements for managing all roads, including gravel roads, are designed so that they're protective of water quality, and that towns have to start with their most connected to the water roads to do those fixes. So that's why all those rock line ditches are going in all over the place, and they're starting with the steepest slopes. And what that does is all those rocks slow the drain water. They capture the sediment, so there's less of it getting into the water. So that's the strategy that we need to be using, which is don't let it get into the water in the first place, not how to remove it once it's there, because once it's in there, we can't. So what we need to do is prevent it from reaching the waterway in the first place. And that's what those regulations are trying to address. And it's going to take time. As we know, there's lots of back roads to deal with.
I think financially our road crew had to complete some of that work prior to fixing my roads, but I had more than this amount of space to go across. So
sorry about that.
That was great fun. Oh, can I get my car across this? I don't know. But, okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
And as someone who lives on a dirt road in Massachusetts, that does not benefit from this program yet. But Vermont's really setting the standards, and the Massachusetts DOT has actually been doing some of the, like having Vermont people come teach come teach them how to start managing in a more river smart way, because it really is important. I mean, when I was describing the West River, it's like, well, if, you follow Route 30 and then follow Route 100, our roads are right there along the rivers.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, I'm Deb Barry, and I live at the Brookline Bridge. I am the house at the Brookline Bridge on the West River. You come down Radway Hill Road, and if you go over the river, you've missed my house before you see my house on the left. I have riverfront property. One comment is I would be happy if you could use my help to do any monitoring right here. I've built a path down to the river and can get down there and do whatever. It's my land goes actually to the river. So, but along with what Gloria said, I did have, with all the rains in the summer, half, it seemed like half of the hill that is now the gravel pit for New Fane, not only come down onto my land, but put inches of silt around my property and also in my basement. So I cannot imagine that a lot of that did not still continue down into the river. So I am worried. Gloria's right. I spoke up at the meeting about the gravel pit. I'm worried about that continuing, as with climate change and as the weather gets wetter and wetter and wetter, is that whole gravel pit going to come down into my house and, wash it into the river effectively? So all of that, and the town, I'm glad to know, Marie, that the town is starting, I guess, up high and kind of working its way down to make these things right. But even still, with the snow and then it melts in the rain, the sand is still coming across my driveway. And one of the things that gave me hope in the meeting that the town had about the gravel pit was that land still has to pass conservation restrictions, and part of that is has to do with runoff and drainage and all of that, and that will not be granted if it doesn't pass that, what is it, Gloria, the Vermont statute or whatever, that the town still has to pass up there. So
Act 250.
yeah, thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So so I don't know, should I call the town? I've only bought this house in 2017, and I was told by my sellers that the town takes care of being sure that the sand doesn't go across my driveway, and that has not happened. So it continues to wash through my property into the river. And I don't know, I'm just one person that whose property values or even the house has been affected, and my land has been affected by this. But now I'm worried about what the potential is for the West River watershed, and what can I do to help in any way?
Okay.
It's a big one, I know.
So I'm looking at, I live by maps, so I'm looking at the map. Can I ask if you're 83 Radway Hill?
That's me, my friend.
Okay.
So
And-
you see my problem.
I do. So is the gravel pit still active?
It's not active yet. It was basically a shooting gallery for ne'er-do-wells up there. They were shooting cannons and whatever, and
Oh, good.
it was not pleasant. But then the town bought it, and I do
Yes.
not believe that the town will be using that gravel until next year.
Well, we have to go through the whole permitting
The
process,
whole
so
permitting,
it'll
right.
be at least a year.
Yeah.
I'm wondering,
Well, go ahead.
well, I was just wondering, Deb, if there's some way, and maybe Marie can state this, that a berm can be put up on the side where the gravel's coming across. You know, it seems to me that there could be some kind of a catchment before it comes across Radway Hill and gets to your property.
That
And-
has happened on my side of the road several times over the years, but not in the last couple of years. I don't know why. I guess there's so much else going on up high that they're not so concerned. But really, literally, if someone were to take, it's a sharp curve there,
Oh,
someone
yeah.
would take the curve too fast in the dark, they would wipe out.
Yeah.
There are still these huge crevices where, water and everything is still coming down. So I guess this, yes, Gloria, I think probably if something were put up over on the other
On
side,
the other side, not on your side, because your side is, it shouldn't come across the road.
my side is too late.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
At that
I
point,
would
it's
be-
either coming in my house or it's continuing down Radway Hill to the river. And I did pay almost $3,000 to have Tanner Wynot come and regrade, along the side, such that my house itself is not the lowest part of the hill, but my driveway kind of still is. So
No, if it's something that the town particularly wants to address, I'm glad to, after the snow's gone, come out and walk the site and see what we can come up with to address those issues, because I'm sure there's a way to regrade or handle that, so that that's not running down right into other people's property. So I'd be glad to do that. And
So
I know Gloria knows how to reach me.
Marie, I was also going to suggest perhaps you could put your contact information in the chat,
Yes.
and therefore, there can be further follow-up on this particular issue. There is another question in the chat, and I think that some of our partners that are on this call might also want to jump in and with some thoughts. The Green Mountain Conservancy owns about 47 acres of floodplain fields along the West River in Newfane. How should those fields be managed to protect the water quality of the river? And Mary Ellen, I believe that she was the one that posted the question. I believe that currently those fields are hayed. Is that correct?
Whoops. Yes, they are. They are.
Yes. Okay, so they're currently hay fields. So I'm going to let some of our partners jump in here.
I mean,
Brian,
in
if you
gen,
want to go for
yeah,
it, go
I'll
ahead.
start. I mean, in general, you want to keep it accessible as a floodplain, so that it's somewhere where water can be stored. And you want to slow the water that's going through it down. So trees and shrubs help a lot, especially right up along the river. You don't want to be hanging all the way to the edge of the field.
We're required to have a 50-foot buffer.
Yeah.
And at least part of the area, it's 50 feet. Part of it, we're letting it grow out so that it goes from whatever it is now up to 50 feet.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, significant sections have Japanese knotweed.
Oh, yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
So,
We're talking Gloria about that.
Hay fields are important. Animals need hay. So I'm not saying we should get rid of all of them, but if you wanted to take it out of hay, my colleague, Fritz Gerhardt, who works in the restoration team at CRC, we've been working on a couple projects he's been working, I can't remember with who, on doing some restorations of like the best way to return something from a hay field or an agricultural field into a floodplain forest, which is what it would be naturally. Something full of trees that are okay with getting inundated. Of course, if there were big trees, there would be less knotweed. And, you know, there's been some, you know, if there's been agriculture, it's possible that the floodplain itself has been raised up over the years to keep it, you know, to get it out of the floodplain, because you want to use it to grow your crops or whatever. You might need to lower that back down, are some of the things that I can think of.
There still exists some floodplain forests both along the river on the west side of the fields and also up against the hillside on the east side of the field. So you can tell it once went right across the field.
Yeah.
And I mean, I agree, Ryan's right on with all of that. So if there's interest by the Conservancy to redo some floodplain restoration work, add trees, add those features, there we have plenty of programs that offer funding to do that. So Corey runs a lot of those, Ryan CRC runs a lot of those. Any of the organization partners would be glad to work with the Conservancy to do a floodplain restoration project and bring that back, which would be great. It's, you know, when you think about all the smaller parcels, we don't need every acre along the river to be accessible floodplain, but each small piece is kind of a pressure relief valve as the water floods and allows that to happen. And as that floods, it slows down the water, all that sediment drops out and stays on the floodplain instead of staying in the water and continuing down, adding that phosphorus and sediment and all those chemicals and everything else into the water column. So that's how we're looking at protecting our water quality more so in the future, is by doing those natural resource restoration projects to keep the water clean, not just to provide habitat, but it's how we keep our water quality high.
Great.
So thank you all. And I wanted to point out for those of you who might not be watching the chat that some of our partners like Marie Caduto and Corey Ross from the Windham County Conservation District, and then Ryan, our presenter for tonight, have all put their contact information in the chat. So if you want to do follow-up information or follow-up questions to any of the partners, then you can reach out directly to them. I will also put my own. Windham Regional, we work with municipalities primarily, and we do also work with groups, watershed groups and other partners. You know, Corey tends to work with a lot of agriculture and water quality and a lot of landowner, you know, individual landowners and types of projects. And Connecticut River Conservancy does a little bit of all of that. They're sort of a broad breadth organization, but reaching out to any one of us will allow you, you know, we are all, as I said at the beginning of the program, in very close contact, and you know, we can get you to a person that can help. So if we're not the direct person that might be able to be the best fit for a certain type of project, we certainly can connect you with that. And so please feel free to reach out. And we probably have another minute or two. I'd like to keep us kind of on schedule, but if we have any more burning questions this evening, I wanted to give an opportunity at that. Oh, Gloria just posted one in the chat, and so I'll read that. When I see cattle drinking out of a brook or stream that runs into the watershed, what should be done? Corey, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, you could certainly reach out to the district and let us know what you've seen. You know, we work with Marie and we work with the Agency of Ag to, you know, when concerns like that are raised, to try to figure out if there's a violation or not regulatory, but we can sometimes remediate those. We can work with producers and help them install fencing or put up trees or do something to address that water quality concern.
Okay, I know that I contacted Marie about one probably 5 years ago, and they have since taken care of the problem. But I've seen, they're small farms, I think, and they're just mucking around in the water and with seemingly no concern. Thank you.
I just want to point out, and I think Gloria, you bring up a great issue. And I know that it's one that the Conservation District really wants to be reaching out towards, is that when we say agriculture, we often think of large commercial farms. Our region, particularly the West River, does not have a lot of these large commercial operations directly in the watershed. What we tend to see instead is small homesteaders, or a little bit, have a few horses. So these very small animal operations, or animal, they have a few pets, but they're large animal pets like horses. They don't consider themselves farms, but the issues are still the same. They if they're grazing too close to the rivers, if they're drinking out of the rivers, or their yard out of the barn is their run gets very mucky and it's right next to a river. All of these can be just as problematic as sometimes the larger farms, but they don't necessarily consider themselves a farm, so they don't necessarily know what resources are available to help them. So that's where reaching out to the Conservation District. They can reach out to landowners if you make, an issue, them aware of an issue. They can reach out to a landowner and say, hey, there's a lot of resources that can help you. And that's kind of their goal. It's not a regulatory thing. It's more of a, how can we work together to help you and help the river? So, all right, any last minute questions before we end for the evening?
I just wanted to say I did put my email address on the chat. So if any of you would like to reach out to me for help right here at the Brookline Bridge, or any further follow-up, there it is. Please, I would be beyond happy to help.
Wonderful.
And I'll contact you, Debbie, about the runoff problem.
Wonderful, thank you.
And Deb, you can always contact me as you have with other things. And I've been involved with this group for a fairly long time, so I'll remind them.
Great. I will add one thing, and I know we have to hang up, but the whole big Mercedes horse farm on River Road has been for sale for a long time. And I was thinking about, because it gets so busy right at this intersection, maybe offering to buy a parcel of that or something. I can't afford the whole thing, obviously. But I walked along after the horses were gone. I walked, I probably shouldn't have, but I walked all the way down to the river. And then I walked all along the river, across all that property to the next house. There were piles and piles and piles of manure. Piles and piles. I was shocked. It stunk like crazy, and it was behind all of the shrubbery and everything. So I think they probably thought, well, there's never. I'm not usually a whistleblower, but I can tell you, unless the waters have washed all that away, there is a lot of stuff down there contributing to runoff, probably on down towards the Dummerston Bridge and that kind of thing. So
interesting.
Yeah. Just so you know.
Didn't know that.
And for all of you online tonight, it may feel like whistleblowing or pointing, but these are issues that affect everyone. They affect the health of the rivers, which affects everything in our communities. Our rivers are sort of the heart of our communities, and whether it's for recreation or fishing, whether it's just the health of the natural environment, whether it's for agriculture, there's so many things, right, that drive our communities around our rivers. And the goal of any watershed partner that's here tonight is not to be punitive, but really just a way. There's a lot of resources that are out there to help. And we want to be able to work with people that are interested in, you know, making improvements so that their operations or their homesteads are in a position to be helped, as well as helping the water quality. Oh, one last question here before we close up for the evening. Is there a need for a farmer to draw water from the rivers to water crops?
Yeah, I meant to say need to get a permit.
Oh, permit.
No, there is no permit required at this time, but that is under discussion. There are certain things called existing uses and designated uses, which are federal water, clean water terms, and irrigation for agriculture is a designated use of our surface waters and all our waters. So it is perfectly legitimate and okay for agriculture to withdraw water for irrigation. The concern is when, you know, large operations can withdraw a lot of water, and we need to, the reason permits are under discussion is because of when we have really low rainfall and low water, you can withdraw enough water to impact the aquatic community. So we want to be able to track that, and when those conditions occur, to be able to monitor it and limit it, so we know where those withdrawals are happening, and we can keep track of those low flows and make sure there's enough water in the river for everything to survive through it.
I'm gonna say one more thing. I said I would shut up, but it just reminded me, Gloria, upriver from me, so between me and, you know, Townsend, right? Someone has been pumping water out of the river. There's a big, huge pipe, and the pump is going like crazy. And sometimes we put in and float down up there, and it's not going over to Dutton Farm on the, as you're heading towards Townsend, I guess. As you're heading north on the left side, it's on the right side of the river, going up there somewhere on the probably Ellen Ware Road along there somewhere. So
Yeah, Dutton still has property up there.
do they? Okay, so maybe that's where it's going.
I believe so.
Okay.
Dutton Farm has extensive property right on the river.
On both
and
sides.
On both sides.
Okay, right.
Yeah, and I have some things to talk about.
Great. Come on down.
Well, thank you all. I want to thank our presenter, Ryan O'Donnell, again, for joining us tonight and doing this wonderful presentation and giving us a view of the water quality monitoring results that SEVWA, the Southeastern Vermont Watershed Alliance, has been primarily collecting for the last many years. And Ryan has been the coordinator for that program and is now sort of working with the Connecticut River Conservancy to monitor an even much broader and coordinate monitoring along Connecticut River watersheds. Well, the Connecticut River watershed in Massachusetts and Vermont, New Hampshire. So he's definitely our go-to for water monitoring in the area. And it's great to have you, Ryan, and we appreciate you bringing all this information to us. And thank you all for coming this evening, and don't hesitate to reach out to any of the partners if you have further questions or want more information. And just a quick reminder that in a few days, probably by next week, realistically, we will have this video recording available. So if you want to see Ryan's presentation again or look at some of those slides again, you will be able to by either going to Wyndham Regional Commission or Connecticut River Conservancy. So thank you all, and hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful
you.
presentation.
Thanks. nice to know we're swimming safe, Ryan.
Yeah, that's good to be able to say that for once.
I bet.